This video is not about the Nikon D6. Everybody trashed it. Me and the guy with the shepherd dog that sits on top of his head, and Koala Boy. Everybody trashed the Nikon D6, but this is not about that. They of course did use the same sensor, and 5 years later that's unforgivable. Not that there's really any such thing as an old sensor. The Nikon D5 performance for incredible low light is excellent. However, noise reduction software and computer has gotten infinitely better. But everybody kept saying, why not? Why is it only 20 megapixels? Why wasn't it at 50 or something like that? There's two reasons for that, and there's two reasons that people don't understand. And the D6 is as much a failure as it ever was. However, that's not to say that the image output from the Nikon D5 wasn't fine. I mean, super fine. Incredible high ISO performance, incredible tracking, blah, 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 blah. But there's nothing there for $6,500. So this is not about what the D6 is, but just the actual science behind the sensor. The reason why, and of course the new Canon flagship camera is a very low megapixel, but there's two reasons people don't understand. Number one, that there's not another sensor out there, because Nikon does not make its own sensors. They used to have their flagship sensors made by Renaissance, but Renaissance was since sold out and incorporated into Sony. But there's no sensor out there with a low megapixel count, or a BSI, or otherwise, for Nikon to incorporate into their Nikon D6. So first they'd actually have to have a sensor to stick in there. With superior performance, there's no way they could actually up the megapixel count without it being a new, better gain sensor, such as a BSI, backside illuminated sensor. Then they could have pumped it up just barely to 24 and still had the same high ISO low noise performance as the Nikon D5. But that sensor is not out there. It doesn't exist. So they could not stick it in a Nikon D6. The other thing people don't understand is why the hell are these flagship, including the Canon, not just the Nikon D5, not just the Nikon D6, which uses the same damn sensor as the Nikon D5. The reason why these hardcore flagship cameras can't have a high megapixel count is because of the pixel pitch, i.e. the size. The reason why like nocturnal animals that hunt in the night have gigantic eyeballs, so they could see stuff that like we could never see, like a little mouse scurrying, like the big owls with their gigantic eyes. Just think of the same perfect analogy on these sensors. Large pixel pitch. Yes, you cannot have, like for example, a Nikon D850 sensor in a D6, for example. It's like, why didn't they stick something? Because that's a backside illuminated sensor, but it is a tight little pixel pitch, relatively speaking. It has the same pixel pitch as a Nikon D500, except scaled up to a full-frame sensor. You can't actually have a high megapixel count on these, the right tool for the right job. And these tools, the flagship Canon and the flagship Nikon, are designed for ultra-hardcore sports action, wildlife, and especially so gritty, dark and grainy, indoor event, club photography, photojournalism, war scene, places where you can't use a flash. Events indoors, also where you can't use a flash. Gritty photography where you want actual, best SNR. The larger the photo sites, the better the gain, i.e. SNR, signal to noise ratio, per unit of time. In other words, per unit of time. You can't increase the eyeballs because like imagine an owl that sees little mice like in near pitch darkness. It's like, how the hell does that owl see that friggin' mouse? And he's got these huge ass peepers. Yeah? That's what the Nikon flagships and the Canon flagship cameras are designed for. That's why they are low megapixel. Now take the same owl and give him human eyeballs. My eyeballs, your eyeballs. Yeah? Now the owl's going to starve to death because it can't see the friggin' mouse in the darkness, so it can't hunt and it can't feed itself. You cannot stick the human normal sized eyeball peepers on these flagship Nikon and Canon. It's a perfect analogy, by the way, my owl analogy. Can't give the owl tiny little peepers, i.e. small eyeballs or small photo sites, i.e. a high megapixel count on these sensors. Number one, the sensor doesn't exist for Nikon to stick in the D6. And this, I'm in no way defending Nikon on that failure of a friggin' D6. 5 years and they gave us nothing. I'm not defending it. But I am stating a fact as far as the sensor is concerned. Can't stick a high megapixel sensor in those damn cameras. Not without a revolutionary new form of sensor technology. You know, the backside illuminated helps on that. This is a way you could actually decrease it a little further and still have the same SNR or noise performance at low light, high ISO per unit of time. But barring, you know, and I know the technologies are still in development, but barring those sensors being existent, you can't do it. So, even though I'm absolutely no way defending the Nikon D6, the massive amounts of ignorance of why everybody was asking why the hell wasn't there a higher megapixel. They could have got away with a 24 megapixel and a BSI sensor and still had the same performance, but the sensor didn't exist. But as far as sticking a 40 megapixel or 36 meg, no way. No way. You could do it, but that tool is designed for low light, gritty, no flash photography for like photojournalism, war photography, indoor event photography. You can't do it on those cameras. Those cameras are not designed for that. That is not their intent of purpose. You know, people that spend $6,500 on a flagship camera, they don't want that kind of performance. That's not what they're for. If they wanted something that was halfway decent, they buy a D850. Which is D850 is more than halfway decent, but I mean, they want a very weather-tight, relatively so anyway, weather-tight camera that has great high ISO, low, bad noise, no flash photography, sort of. I think I made myself clear. So those are the two reasons why there was not a high, barring everything else and what the failure of the Nikon D6 is. That's the reason why those flagship cameras, and the Canon sensor and the new Canon flagship is exactly the same way. And even the Canon people that have no friggin' clues, like, why is this, you know, this looks like a great camera, the new 1DX Mark III from Canon. Why the hell is the megapixel count so low? Well, that's the reason why the megapixel count's so low. It's that way for a reason, not because Canon or Nikon are lazy. It's because those are meant to be specific tools for a specific spectrum of use. Once again, we get back to the whole thing of the right tool for the right job. I'm glad I could explain that to you, because a lot of people don't seem to understand that very well. I hope you like these videos. If you do, click the link below, which is not an affiliate link. You know, any donation is greatly appreciated. Or you can tell me to go, you know, jump in a lake of fire, whatever makes you happy. But I'm happy explaining things that none of the rest of these idiots on YouTube can do or are willing to do. Actually, they just don't understand it. There's even people out there, wait for it, there's even people out there that think larger sensors gather more light, which they don't, because exposure is per unit area, not per total area. And when you tell them that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, they still think they're right, even though they're 100% wrong. Not because it's my opinion or feeling or belief that they're wrong, it's because they are wrong. Period. Flat out hardcore. You know. There's also people think sensors operate like pixels. Larger sensors gather more light. They'll use words like total light. Total light is not anything applicable to photography. It's not. It's not. Oh, we made a point of stuff like that back in photography school, where we'd actually take 4x5 film and we'd chop it up like a little piece of it, and we'd tape it to the inside of the back of a 4x5 camera. You know, a little tiny piece of film, and expose that. And you see, does the exposure change because the same as the sensor, except we're just talking about a piece of film instead of the sensor. Is the exposure changed? The answer is no. You just took out a piece, because exposure is per unit area, not total area. That's just stupid. This is the reason why no professional light meter on Earth has an entry or a button or a switch for letting you choose sensor size. Because light meters don't work off of sensor, because sensor size is not connected to exposure. And I have the most advanced, expensive light meter that money can buy, and there's no entry on that little sucker for sensor size. No, there's not, girlfriend. And there's a reason for that. Because total light has nothing to do with photography. Yeah, it's like larger sensors don't gather more light. Sure they do. No, they don't. If you think they do, you are funny. You are funny. Thanks. Yeah, goodbye. Oh my God.